I had to take a break because the crushing existential weight of our collapsing democracy being paraded in by a group of callous sociopaths kinda took me out for a bit there. None of what's happening really surprised me. I've been expecting this, but there's been a pretty stark difference between that sort of cold, knowledgeable expectation and the emotional reality when that expectation actually lands. And that emotional reality, it really fucked me up. And to understand why, you kind of need to know me a little bit better. See, I spent the first few decades of my life with a victim mentality. I tacitly gave my agency to the whims of an objective world of which I claimed I had no control. Things just happened to me, and I scrambled to react to them. I had no discipline. I was a quivering mess of anxiety and self-doubt. My future had no prospects. I was intelligent enough to give the auspices of being put together, but my mental stability was held up by toothpicks and single-ply toilet paper. And then sometime in my early 30s, after working a job that brought all of that weakness into a very vulnerable light, I started to change. I wish I could say it was some great act of personal volition, some epic moment where I drew a line in the sand and then the movie montage kicked in of me putting in the hours to better myself, but it wasn't that at all. What actually happened is that I stumbled into a passion. While in this liminal place between jobs, I started working with my hands. I started building things, creating. I found woodworking, and that changed everything. For years, I'd been listless, like I was sitting in a kayak letting the river take me where it wanted, and I let that happen. I would have let it take me over a cliff while ignoring the paddle in my hands. I was just complacent and lost. But when I found woodworking, it was like I suddenly realized that I did have control over the kayak. I could steer it, and I wanted to. I suddenly had things I wanted to do. Days went from these lost blobs of time between stuffing my mouth to actively searching for hours so I could learn and build. And in all that creation, I found the thing I lacked: control. I had ceded control to the demons in my head and let them lull me into this idea that my life was just going to pass me by and I could do nothing to change it. I was a victim of my circumstances I manifested in order to be a victim. And in that time, when I learned to use my hands, I also learned that I did actually have control over my life. Sure, there were always physical things I couldn't control, but internally, the way I thought and the way I reacted to the world around me was always up to me, and that changed everything. I stopped being a victim of my created circumstances. Instead of trying to find excuses for inaction, I started searching for solutions to problems. And none of this was easy. There were always setbacks, but I never let go of my ability to control my thoughts and my feelings. I don't think there's ever been a period of my life where I learned more, because if I didn't have a solution, I had to figure it out. And this, of course, pertained to wrestling those demons in my head, but also in practical day-to-day matters. I didn't just learn woodworking. I learned to fix the things in my house. I started to work on my car. I learned how to weld and how to solder copper pipe and how to wire electrical boxes. I took back my agency, and for the first time in years, I got back my will to live. Now I run a small woodworking business putting together pieces of furniture that were mysteries to me 5 years ago. I oftentimes stop while in my workshop and look at what I've created, all of the tools and workbenches, and wonder who I used to be and how I got to where I am. I found my passion, the thing that gets me out of bed, and I continue to learn and I try to grow. And I say all of this because it is the context you need to understand how utterly devastating it was when just a few weeks ago I mentally collapsed. I found myself feeling a way I hadn't in years, that old feeling of victimhood crawling up my arms, a total lack of control, and it invited panic and fear. Because once again, I feel like I don't have control. I turn on the news and I see every day the machinations of an authoritarian takeover of our country, and what am I supposed to do? How maddening is it to see this, plain as day, propped up by our historical record and mountains of evidence, yet being denied by swaths of people? And I can understand why those people deny this reality. They are lost in their emotions like I was, the victims of decades of anti-intellectual rhetoric weaponized to manipulate and turn them into well-behaved sycophants. This, of course, doesn't excuse their actions, but it does contextualize it for whatever that may be worth. We are beyond the point of conversation. If the edicts of this administration thus far have done nothing to move their needle, then nothing will. They will cheer as people like me and you are rounded up and sent to prison camps. They will fill stadiums to watch on jumbotrons the atrocities committed against their neighbors. And all of it will be masked in just enough of a justification to make them feel like the heroes of their stories. You and I will be called terrorists, will be castigated as evil interlopers trying to destroy the soul of this nation. Our words will become crimes, our actions illegal. That is the path of authoritarianism. And these sycophants will love every moment of it. Every murder of innocents, every human atrocity will be met with cheers. And I see this potential future, and I freeze. Because I have no control. What can I possibly do to make an iota of difference? And the people that do have the power to make some kind of difference are so weak and ineffectual, they choose to pretend that the status quo isn't lying in 1,000 pieces. So what are we to do? And it was in this quagmire of emotional confusion and instability in which I found myself. How do you combat this banal malice, these great institutions being bent to the will of tyrants? How can one person do anything to push back? And I did find an answer. I did wade out of this swamp. But the thing is, there is no magic wand that suddenly ends this. People want a mass movement, a general strike, a complete shutdown of the U.S. economy. And while that may do the job, it's just not going to happen. We don't have the social and political will for that, at least not right now. I would imagine the vast majority of the population has not seen a significant change in any of their day-to-day life since January. Our lives are not the stories of movies. Our change is always slow, and so is the answer I found. It's not great, it's not sexy, but it is simple. Resist. Don't capitulate. Because I had a full circle moment in my state of mental degradation. I went back to the first time I felt as if I had no control, those years of being a victim of my own creations. And the reality was that I always had control, but I had given it up. And this is no different. These authoritarians want you to feel hopeless and scared and filled with such panic and anxiety that you are paralyzed. They want you to cede your agency. They want you to view our lives like we're all sitting in a kayak being whisked down a river, and they are banking on us not realizing that we're all holding the paddles. And it was in that realization that I remembered a promise I made to myself. I would never give up my agency again. And I won't. I won't let these authoritarians and sycophants take that away from me. I've already done it, and it is an awful, thankless existence. And while I do not have control over the physical world around me, I do have control over my thoughts and my emotions. I do have control over how I react to the news I read. And getting lost in fear and panic is never the answer. Letting them strip you of who you are and filling you with fear and anxiety is never the answer. If you are constantly cowering in fear, dreading the next breaking news announcement, then you are not able to think clearly and you are not able to resist. You have to understand that your fear and panic are manufactured. And I know that what I'm going to say isn't sexy or some great act of rebellion. Hell, you might view it as naive, but it is necessary. Don't lose who you are because of their hatred. They want to fill this country with anger and malice and contempt, and if we hide who we are, if we sit quietly in fear, then those vices become our identity. We need to show compassion and empathy and love, not for them. This isn't some they go low, we go high bullshit, but those virtues need to be alive in our world or we will lose them. Showing compassion for immigrants is an act of resistance. Showing empathy for the thousands being killed in Palestine is an act of resistance. Showing love for marginalized people losing their rights is an act of resistance. They may not be some massive groundswell, but they are sorely needed. Do not lose your voice. If you know me at all, you know that I find a lot of comfort in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, a man that faced down the trenches of World War I and knew the depths of horror we are capable of as humans. And the past few weeks have me going back to a rather famous passage, almost overused at this point, from the Fellowship of the Ring. When Frodo is sitting in the darkness of Moria with Gollum lurking in the shadows, he laments to Gandalf, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." And Gandalf, in his wisdom and comfort, says to Frodo, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And that is what we have to do as we face these authoritarians, because we get to choose what we do with this time. They do not make that decision for us, and we will choose to resist.